Welcome to the Raising Empowered Kids interview series. I'm really excited to have Charis Denison here with us today. The reason I'm so excited is because I think it's essential that we include boys in this conversation. And Charis, as a youth advocate, she has been spending a lot of time working with boys. And I was really moved by one of her TED Talks that was talking about how our boys are in crisis today. And, we've heard these, terrible things on the news where these boys, they drink alcohol, they commit crimes under the influence, and lives are ruined as a result. And there's just so much going on here that we can unpack, and we're gonna go into some of that here today. But the ways that we used to do things is no longer acceptable, and we don't really have a vision of what the new normal, what the new way of doing things, could be, should be, ought to be, these types of things. So what we're doing here with this telesummit is creating a vision of what is possible and the different things that we can do to help support our boys, our young men, to become a more evolved version of the masculine, shall we say. And so I am very happy, very excited to bring you Charis today. She is a youth advocate. She is an expert in human development, ethics, social justice, community involvement, and she's built her experience primarily partnering with schools and nonprofits over the last 23 years. She's received national recognition for her work in several of these fields, and she currently runs Prana Consulting. And through Prana, she partners with over 30 different schools. She works with teens, families, organizations, and communities around the issues of human development and social justice, ethics. Her work as a youth advocate emphasizes empowering young people to make choices that end in honor and joy rather than guilt, shame, or regret. And her work is being currently featured in the final chapter of Peggy Ornstein's latest book, Girls and Sex: Navigating the New Landscape. And if you've never read that book, it's quite eye-opening, for what the girls are, experiencing, both in the high schools and in the college environments. So everyone, welcome. We're here today with Charis and Adrienne, and I'm so excited to have you both here with me today because I want to talk about boys and our culture, our society. And Charis, can you start out talking to us? I know that you've talked a lot about like the crisis that boys are in today. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's hard to say a little bit about that, but I think in the nutshell, um, all teenagers, well, I mean, all people, but we're talking about teenagers are after three things: recognition, connection, and power. And these days, the spaces that already were really limited for our boys to try to find their real selves is shrinking. And so if we don't provide spaces for our boys to find that connection and recognition and power and give them spaces that serve them and ourselves, they'll try to find them alone. And short term, it hurts them, and long term, it hurts us. And it's a problem that, especially in today's social and political climate, is I think pretty dire.
And can you tell us a little bit more about the problems?
Well, I feel like these days, boys are always just so hungry, starving to be recognized and seen, and boys in our culture are basically encouraged to either be either happy or mad. And when you have those two choices, trying to be a teenager and discover who you are when you're only given those two realities and lenses to look at your experiences through, if we don't widen that, then we're creating a really lonely population. And what I'm seeing now is that my less privileged boys are still either targeted, overseen is what I call it, or invisible, and seen as a potential problem, if not a current one. And our more privileged boys are more and more being not being called out on entitled behavior and encouraged to shut down on places where they could show up more. And so they are also, I think, being ignored. And so both are misunderstood, unseen, and when you end up feeling like your least privileged and your most privileged boys are being ignored, then we're in trouble.
And how does that manifest, the problems and the trouble?
I mean, I think we can look around right now and basically see a lot of that. I guess, well, I have this phone number that teens can call or text whenever they feel that they're experiencing regret in any way. And what I always tell people that surprises them is that the large demographic of people that call and text that number are boys between the ages of 14 and 22. And it is just a loneliness, a confusion of how to show up. And the biggest thing that I see is that this is Adrian, who's one of my lead facilitators and one of my youngest, and is super articulate about this. So I should shut up in a minute and let him speak on this. But I hear so many of the boys that go through my classrooms and my curriculum, and they finish the curriculum and they say, okay, so this totally makes sense. Like, I get that being a man has more to do with empathy than shutting down. And I understand that naming my behavior when I see it has negative repercussions on myself and others. I get that's where I want to be, but where am I rewarded for that? Like, once I step out of this classroom and out of this room and I show up as that person, I am either ostracized, vilified by my peers, marginalized. And so that idea of the crisis of what I see is just either boys that are learning very quickly to shut down and narrow their pursuit of who they are to protect themselves, and then a bunch of very lonely boys who are trying to find a larger community to be who they are. Can you say that better than I did? Want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there's a lot of boys out there that want to share a lot and want to really be themselves or be more sensitive with their peers around them at school or whatever activities they do. But usually there's kids, like what Charis mentioned, with more power, and they'll kind of set that example of a certain type. And if those kids that want to be more sensitive or open speak up, they'll just shut them down right away, call them weak, or different terms that are even worse.
Totally.
Sure. So basically, if you try to express yourself or share emotions other than happiness or anger, then you're being shut down by your peers. And
yeah. We were doing a group. We do quite a bit of work with an amazing man called Ashanti Branch, and he was in the film The Mask You Live In, and he does an activity involving a mask, and we've done a lot of workshops with female identifying and male identifying teens around this mask that you put in place to protect yourself. And Adriana and I were leading a middle school boys group. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
So Adrian was leading it along with another facilitator of mine who was about 19. And in those groups, usually the boys sit in a circle and I sit outside the circle and then throw prompts in now and then hand it over to my teen facilitators that are used to this language and have them show vulnerability as strength. And it's remarkable that with a group of, like, these were 7th and 8th graders, some of our youngest, that if they just see 2 young men model that and have nobody laugh, they just step into that space like you wouldn't believe. And what was that like for you? Because you didn't know any of those boys, and you walked in, and in that minute I was like, what would you do in the world if you knew you wouldn't be judged?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that question?
Well, yeah, we walked in there and we set the tone, and those kids, a few of them were still a little giggly, thought it was funny, but you just set the tone right away. And they, eventually after a few minutes, they knew we weren't messing around. So once we started to show them how open we could be and how vulnerable we could be, and they were already in that, in that state of mind, they really started to, say things you really wouldn't expect from middle school boys.
Yeah.
Or in any other situation they wouldn't say.
Yeah.
I can't imagine any other scenario where they'd open up like that.
Right.
Not to a friend, family, no one.
Mm.
Do you remember what did you say when to that question? If you knew you would have no, ramifications, how would you show up differently as a male identifying teenager? Do you remember what you said?
If I had no judgment.
If you knew judgment, yeah, no consequences, no negative.
Well, I'm particularly really sensitive guy, so I would not show up any, sometimes I'll be kind of to fit in, a little brutal or mean, it's kind of with other guys messing around, you kind of fit in that way,
Adrian's a kick-ass soccer player, so
yeah, within those
he's got
scenarios,
a couple masks.
Yeah, you gotta kind of. But if there were no standards in that way, no people with power who were just going to shut me down, then I would, I wouldn't do those sort of things. I'd just be really nice to everyone. I mean, I pretty much am, but then you're kind of known as that nice guy who,
right.
And you're kind of isolated in that way, because those guys who really are mean all the time, or we go to assholes all the time.
Totally.
They usually end up with all the power, and that's just that cycle. They shut down the guys like me.
Totally. And then what I thought was interesting in that particular circle, since we're talking about that, is that my 19-year-old facilitator said, and it's hard to be a middle school boy and talk in a room with a teen boy that has facial hair. Right there, it gets a little intimidating. And this particular 19-year-old, who looked even older than he actually is, leaned forward and said, I wish I could be touched more, physically touched, and I wish I could touch my friends. And to have that happen, and about 5 minutes later, one of the boys got a little emotional, and a boy leaned over and put his hand on his shoulder. And I wonder if that would have happened if my other facilitator hadn't put himself out there and said that.
Right.
But I feel like, Adrian's idea of the asshole thing, what I said to my son when he was entering middle school, he's now entering high school, but I said, around now in 7th grade, you're going to get applications, and we call it for dick school, but we'll just say jerk school right now. And these applications are going to start rolling in, and some of your friends are going to get recruited early because they're naturals. Yeah. And this is the ones that Adrian was talking about that are just consistently mad or happy. And I'm like, and some of your friends will apply and then decide not to go, and some will go and then maybe transfer back. And my point to my son was, I can't tell you what kind of young man or man that you're going to be. My hope for all of my students, especially my teen boys, is to be present and name your behavior. And in my curriculum, what's so awe-inspiring to me about my boys is that they don't have places to do that. They don't have a place, for example, I wanted my son to, I wanted to say, just look around, and one day you might be like, wow, I think I'm at jerk school right now. And we still talk about some of his friends, and he'll say, oh, so-and-so I think is back from jerk school, so we're going to be hanging out. But just those spaces to have my teen boys, that number they call in text, to be able to call up and say, I think that I had a questionable consensual experience last night. I don't think I listened. And for me to love that boy for naming that, that's what we don't have. That boy is either applauded for having a non-consensual experience by some of his peers, or shamed. And so how can we expect our boys to try to find their real selves when there's an agenda all the time and everywhere? And there's no place for them simply to be loved for naming who they are and why they're behaving the way they do. That's why my curriculum is called Resisting the Setup, is that our boys are set up to behave in ways that don't serve other people, but also don't serve themselves.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit more about your curriculum?
Well, the curriculum's basic framework is like I said, it's called Resisting the Setup. And then there's ways that young people are set up to experience regret, guilt, and shame rather than joy and honor. And so basically my curriculum is a combination of the 4 areas that teens are most set up to be led astray around those topics. And so it's sexuality, and all that encompasses drugs and alcohol, social justice, and ethics. So those are the 4 areas of just trying to figure out what their rights are and how their behavior affects other people's rights, what their values are, not their parents necessarily, or their church, or me. And then, you know, I always make this joke that I didn't lie in bed when I was 10 and say, someday I'm going to be a sex educator, because that's really weird. But I did realize that if I wanted my teens to experience as much joy and honor as possible, you can't teach social justice, and you can't teach teenagers in any non-academic way without being an expert in sexuality and drugs and alcohol, because it's a minefield of regret, potential regret.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Powerful and important work. Thank you.
It's never boring. And I get to hang out with like the most amazing population on the planet. And I think it's so interesting because Adrian is such a great example. You know, I texted him last night actually and was like, hey, do you want to do this thing with me? So, you know, it's kind of off the cuff. And but this is somebody who completely has a choice. Like he could get a full ride to Dick School if he wanted to. He's popular, he's athletic, he's you know, it's just all the things that he could completely fly under the radar. And he just consistently wakes up every day and chooses to try to not do that. And why do you do that?
I mean, when you're talking about the Dick School, it really hit a spot. Because I could think of plenty of like particular people that I, you know, been friends with.
Yeah.
And we kind of go in cycles. Like I have this one friend I go in cycles with. Like one piece of the cycle is he'll start being a dick to me. And so right there, I'll like withdraw. Like I'm done. Like this is not unnecessary. So I just won't. I'll kind of like let him know like I'm not okay with it, and I'll just not talk to him, not hang out with him. The next part of the cycle is he'll be like really nice to me. This is actually a soccer team. He'll be really nice to me. So I'll, you know, we become friends again. It'll be all sensitive. Then we like kind of gain a friendship again, you know, we're friends, we're starting to hang out. And then it's back to that, you know, Dick stage. So the Dick School really hit the spot. Like, okay, he's away now. That means I'm away. And once he's back, I guess I kind of fall back to hanging out with him.
Well, can you speak, Adrian, and you can interrupt me anytime, Rob. But if you feel comfortable and you pass, the other thing is always giving teenagers, even if you're parenting, always give your kids a pass. Just because you ask a question doesn't mean that So, but if you feel comfortable, can you talk about safe spaces as far as you choosing to not be in Dick School, but also like, for example, in your class, I don't know if you know who's going to be watching this, so I'm not sure you feel comfortable, but the idea of how much here you were in this situation where you could be totally showing up as your real self and you didn't speak.
So there was this a human development class as the start of my freshman year. Do you want me to go around that fallback?
I don't know, do you?
Yeah, I'm completely fine with that.
Totally.
There's a human development class.
Can you define fallback? So the other thing is fallback positions in my curriculum, and a fallback is?
So when you're made uncomfortable, it's how you react. So you either react passively, aggressively, or it could be passive aggressively. So yeah, it's when you're made uncomfortable. Some people like react, you know, violently, or some won't say anything. and then some will be all, a little unclear about it, and that's kind of like passive aggressive. So in this class, it was human development class. So it's sort of like the work I do with Charis. That's what we learn about, and then you learn about current events, that sort of thing. So in this class, I got the class with a bunch of like really loud kids, just always a lot of boys that were perpetuating this, a lot of homophobic stuff, all this different things in this class. And so in here, where I had plenty to say, it was kind of like you kind of raise your hand and just share. The teacher didn't really pick on anyone, so I'm kind of like a quieter guy, more introverted. And there's plenty of things I wanted to say, but I never said anything because I knew once I stepped out of that classroom, it could completely turn on me, completely bring me shame. Even though the teacher said, "Oh, like this is a safe space." Mm-hmm. Well, you can say that all you want, but if the kids aren't making it safe, then
right.
Yeah.
That was my, it was my passive fallback, and it was a safe one. And there was,
Was it lonely though?
Of course, yeah, it was lonely because but at the same time, I knew if I said something, even if guys did relate with it, they weren't gonna say that. I would have been the only one, and it would have brought me more negative things than positive to the class.
So that's your safe mask.
Yeah, safe mask.
Totally.
I wonder how like we can create, like a situation where where it actually is safe to like share in that way, and I mean, in the ideal world, it's like we wouldn't have mean kids.
Right.
Why are the kids so mean?
Right. Well, and nobody, is born trying to get the skills to be mean, yeah. And it's just this idea of, that meanness comes from fear. Yeah. And we are raising, and I joke with my friend Ashanti because we both have primary populations we work with, and then we have lots of others we do, and his primary is African-American young men or men of color who are marginalized and underserved. And mine is a lot of private school, white privileged male. And basically both of those populations, I think, are at our most risk. They're at risk populations, and they're equally dangerous if we ignore them. And there's so much fear on both sides, just enormous fear. And I went down to a school recently with a panel of some of my young men, because there was a senior class that just had some really toxic young men, and they were seniors. They heckled their female teachers, including their dean of students. They weren't suspended. They were talked to and chastised, much like the stereotypical coach in a locker room kind of thing. And then they just went back to being who they were. And so we went through the side door. My curriculum is work backwards, think sideways. So you want to work backwards from hoping that we have happy, giving, radically kind young people as they graduate from high school. And then sometimes we have to think sideways on how to get there, because it is such a, they're so underserved as far as tools and spaces to actually do this correctly. So I got a panel of young men, and then a couple of young women, because we knew we were targeting these senior boys, but we didn't want it to look like that. And it was basically just a workshop, like a panel that was like, come see what life is like after high school. And so I picked and I scrolled through very manipulatively my text and found some of my young men who graduated who look just like those boys want to look like, right? So I got a freshman fraternity brother from Stanford. I got a lacrosse player from college. I got somebody just doing a kick-ass gap year. And then we just basically, the flyer was, come see what the party scene is, or with some stupid, like, let's talk about sex and drugs in college. And then the subtext was, what is the subtext? And we would all huddle right beforehand, and it was all like, how to not be a dick. So it was like, that was basically, how do you show up in a kind way? And they basically just role modeled, they looked like those senior boys wanted to look like, and they behaved completely differently. They used different language, and so you could hit the homophobia, and you can hit the entitlement, you can hit the fear and the misogyny. And if we did that more, the other famous thing I always say is, this isn't complicated, it's just hard. And so because it's hard, we don't want to do it. And like we talked about before, for our boys, it's just easier to fly under the radar. It's exhausting trying to be an exceptional young man in this culture, because you don't get much reward for it, except for like an old lady wearing silver and flowy clothes. And so until there's more than people like myself teaching this stuff, and more young men like Adrian who are out there doing the work,
Right.
that's the answer.
Mhm.
Yes, absolutely. So we have our audience is parents, and they're here because they want to shift the way these kinds of things manifest. And so, like, what would you say to parents who don't want their son or daughter to end up in dick school? And like, what are the things that we can do to kind of prevent that from happening?
It's fun to hear you say dick school, Robin.
Yeah, you like that?
The biggest thing is, again, not complicated, but is role modeling all the myriad emotions that exist between mad and happy. My partner played college football, and it's really great for him to just role model confusion, just like, and to reward all of our boys for naming any emotion that they actually are experiencing, or accountability. It's just so important. And to take that fear. And there's a story that I tell that a lot of my students remember, that my son won't mind my telling this story, but when he was 5, we were at the grocery store, and I'm talking about, he's 5 years old, and when you can start this kind of curriculum and this kind of language, which is, what's your fallback? What do you do when you're uncomfortable? What are you noticing? What was challenging today? Not how did your day go, or what did you do that was great? Like, it's what did you do that was hard? And then not have a solution to that problem. Just name, wow, that sounded really hard. Pass the potatoes. Like, it's just that linear idea that our boys have to have an answer and a linear end, when really we need to have them practice just naming where they are and loving them for that. And we were in the grocery store, and I was with my 4, and he was 5, and my daughter was like a little over like 6. And I had a man behind me, and both of my children were hanging onto my pant legs at the grocery store, and I was putting the stuff on the belt, and this man behind me, who was in a coat and tie, leaned forward, and he was like, "Lady, could you just hurry up?" And I mean, I live in Marin County, so I was like, where are you going that is so important? Like, are you late for meditation? Like, what is going on? And I tried to just joke, and I just said, we all do the best we can. Again, role modeling for my children. This is just name where you are. You don't need, this is that idea of not being aggressive or passive, but just naming. We all do the best we can. And then 2 seconds later, he leans forward. Did I ever tell you the story? You know the story.
I think so.
And he leans forward, and he's like, "Look, lady, either hurry up or get the hell out of the way." And I was like, okay. So meanwhile, he clearly is not a mother of 2, because I was so tired I could have snapped him in half in that moment, but I did not. And my daughter was frightened, and so she let go of my pant leg in one way and hid behind me. And so I reached down to comfort her, and my son, 5 years old, let go of my pant leg and walked right up to this guy and looked right up at him and said, "Oh, do you have sadness inside of you?" And I mean, I was like, I couldn't have planned it better. I mean, the guy was like, "What?" And my son said, "Well, my mom tells me that when people are this mean, they have a lot of sadness or scared inside of them." And then he offered to give the man a hug. And I was like, "No, we don't hug the sad man. Come back." But that kind of language back then for our boys to not only name their own behavior, but name the behavior of those around them. Right. And they're so taught to react rather than just sit and name where they are. And when you only get to be happy or mad, and then we encourage them to react, if you had it's just, we're just pushing them so much into reaction and having to have it figured out and knowing answers. Whereas a parent, if we just continually reward them for not knowing the answer to something or not reacting, but just hearing, like that idea of empathy, you just listened really well to that. Thank you. Done.
Mm-hmm.
And the golden rule is, I always say the 3 to 1 is for every 3 minutes your teen talks, you talk for 1. But with teen boys, for every minute and a half they talk for about 30 seconds. Because you're being hazed in a really smart, healthy way, is that they're just so used to being talked at. And there's usually an agenda from adults in some way or another. And when teenagers realize that the only agenda is no agenda, except just our hope that they find joy rather than regret, it's amazing to watch what can happen and where they can go. Did I say that right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Right.
Okay. I never know when I make sense or not.
Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to, you're asking this, our parents, like the parents are our audience. So you're wondering,
Right.
what do we do? The only thing I can think of is the experience I had. You have someone like Charis go in to kind of, set up the whole thing and have like a foundation. But you find kids that are older than who you're teaching,
Mm-hmm.
maybe hopefully have a beard, scare them a little bit, who understand this stuff and set that tone. And you just have to be patient. You go one kid by kid and then class by class. There's no other way. There's no way for adults to do it. Teachers, parents can only be supportive. There's no way for them to teach this really once the kid is already toxic. It takes older influences, I feel like.
Yeah.
So when somebody's kind of gone down that path
Yeah.
of toxic masculinity or, not being a nice person, then it really takes a facilitator to come in and kind of a different way, you think?
Yeah, like a younger.
Yeah.
For boys, especially a male,
Mm-hmm.
really helps.
And I feel like, until we have more than this ridiculously tiny definition of what comes up when we say masculine,
Mm-hmm.
because masculine is like, the definition is this wide. It's straight. And then there's a whole bunch of other minutia in there that's super powerful, that implies just in a population that is not, that there's such a wide definition of masculinity. And that's exciting to me, is that in today's political climate, teens have something to push back up against. And so I'm getting a lot more of my younger people wanting to be more politically active. And I'm also getting facilitators. I have middle school facilitators now whose identifying pronoun is they. I have openly out queer, bi, gay teens that aren't carrying big chips on their shoulders. They are proud. They are charismatic and exciting to be around. That's what we need so much more of. And I feel like for parents, we have a high standard. And for our boys, I feel like this idea of, obviously, to get rid of language like man up and be strong and all of that stuff's got to go away. That's
boys don't cry.
Boys don't cry. And just the implied also of just like, do you have a girlfriend yet? Like what, but I had a really neat thing happen with one of my young men. This was a couple years ago. He was captain of a soccer team at a high school, and he was in the locker room, and there was a younger kid on the team from his team that was showing nudes off in the locker room. So these are nudes photos of other girls, some of them classmates. And so super uncomfortable situation. And this young man is one of my prajna facilitators. And I think about that, if he had been my son, that feeling like, do I always have to be the person that steps up and says something right now? And like, do I constantly have to be that person? And And I would so hope that if he were my son and he came home and said, and I didn't do anything, that there would not be at worst a lecture, but not even a, why don't you like, of just like, wow, that must have been so hard to watch. What did it feel like? And then let him be able to have that conversation, which is what he did in our group. And then he said he watched this other kid walk up to the boy and say, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to delete those pictures. I'm going to take your phone away. And the idea that he didn't step in that moment, but to have someone else do it was such a gift to him. And rather than him go to shame that as the captain of the team, he didn't step in that moment, but to have some joy and pride in that one of his younger teammates stepped up and did something, that I would hope both those boys would get to go home that night and talk to their parents about what they did. And both of them would be met with equal empathy and respect. I just think it's a pretty weird paradox that as parents, we hold this enormously high standard for our boys. And I do consent work in the state of California because now it's mandated in all public schools that all high school seniors have to graduate with comprehensive sex education and affirmative consent. And I do a parent workshop, and all these parents are so worried that their boys who would never do anything wrong might get falsely accused. And that's a valid fear. I do have some of my boys put in really vulnerable positions, but also we have to think about how we're raising our boys to be met when you're confused or when you're uncomfortable. If your fallback is to go silent, which is what is a total stereotypical male response, go silent, don't ask for help, and just keep going, take control. And then we shame and feel like, that these boys now are considered rapists, where that middle ground of like parenting our boys to honor the fact that this gets messy out there. It gets messy and it gets confusing. And to not have this high standard of, we don't ever want you to do that. Yes. And what are situations that would lead somebody to do that? And that's just one example. But again, just like really honoring the fact of not having such a high standard for failure, because the definition of a teenager should be failure. We just have to make sure that we don't create a toxic culture where the idea of failing, which normally can really help one learn, doesn't cause pain and suffering and to others.
Yeah, well, the path to success is lined with the bricks of failure.
Totally, absolutely. It's
like if a little baby, gave up when they fell down when they were trying to walk, none of us we'd all be crawling around on the floor still.
I know, right? Or all of a sudden, if like the fourth time they got up, they actually went 5 paces and went down. We don't sit there and say, well, that kid's going to be flipping burgers at McDonald's probably in 15 years. Like, it's just backwards. It's really backwards as far as like really wanting to embrace. And especially for our boys, like girls are socialized. We're supposed to make mistakes because we're supposed to be weak and stupid and not be able to take care of ourselves. But then to hand all the responsibility to our boys when we give them little to nothing. And given our current social and political climate, we need some role models.
Yeah.
We need to know what radical kindness looks like right now, and not see tons of behavior rewarded for that is not just toxic, but just horrible.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you talk a little bit about like what your vision of like healthy, like what is healthy masculinity? Like what does that look like?
What does that look like, Adrian?
So it's more of just
I'm saying that because I don't really know what to say in this moment, so I'm making him do it.
Yeah, I mean
it's hard.
It's hard to imagine,
Right.
Yeah. But it's more of just like a natural sort of. It's like when you're a child, just at the point where you're least affected by middle school or high school, just who that person is. And I don't know, it'd be interesting to see like a child growing up without like all these influences from other kids and see. So yeah, the ideal kid would just be free to, say or do whatever they want.
And identity, just exploring your identity.
Exactly. And just doing things to explore that.
Yeah.
And failing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, your identity changes after that. Like, just without all those influences, that would be the ideal.
Totally. I I'm flashing on one school where I was on a regular basis, where I was half-time there. So, and I had 2 semester-long classes. So I had these kids, almost every day for 80 minutes. So we got pretty tight. And when I left that school and made the announcement that I was leaving, it was just this really sweet moment. And it was a class of about 18 teenagers. These were 10th graders. And I said, so, I'm leaving. We'll still stay in touch, but I won't be at school next year. And this one boy, without thinking, because this was a space that was fairly safe, said, oh my God, who am I going to go to when I find out I'm gay? And it was just like this awesome moment of just, what would it be like if things like that could just come in? And then there was this pause for half a second, and then everyone like clapped. And I was like, well, there you go. And he's like, oh, like, it was just one of those. And when I think about the not complicated, just hard thing, like, I did a workshop again with Ashanti, and we went into a private school of the entire school, 9th through 12th. They knew me because I'd come into their grade levels 2 or 3 times a year, but that's it. And had never met Ashanti, and he modeled the masculine side of a mask, and I modeled the female, and we had an entire school workshop for 3 hours, and within 45 minutes to an hour, almost the entire auditorium was in tears of these boys. Like, and this was the boy half, like, and these were 9th graders with 12th grade boys. So that really says something of how hungry those boys were to just have an emotional experience about what it's like to be considered masculine. And if we could get, and it happens every time. I mean, this just like we started this conversation with these, they're so hungry for those spaces. So that idea of healthy masculinity, if we just need to create a space to give it the definition it deserves, and then practice, and then reward the hell out of our boys that step into that space and show up. And it's just like, and to see that was such a unique experience, because I watched a boy who clearly was the embodiment of like the student council president bust down in tears, and then a boy who had just come out as gay, and both of them stood up there in tears about how hard it was for them to fit into the definition of masculinity, and to get a standing ovation. Just giving myself goosebumps. It was just such a privilege to watch that happen. And none of our boys want to be dicks. They don't want to be, maybe a couple, but it's just, to widen that definition. And I really feel like it's this generation, it seems counterintuitive, but has a remarkable opportunity in turning things around, and to fuel the anger of feeling that things right now are pushing teens into smaller and smaller spaces. Is perfect time for them to rebel in a really healthy way and push it out the other way.
Yeah.
Can I add on to that?
Absolutely.
So just to pinpoint it, like the problem, I feel like so many guys feel like they have no one to talk to. Like, I felt like that plenty of times. You can have all the friends you want, you can be as popular as you want, but it doesn't matter. Like, if you have no one to talk to, that's when you just go into that deep hole. And I feel like with girls, it's a little different. You can find girls that, if you are a girl, you can just go and cry to or tell anything, right? If they're alone, right? Even if they're not comfortable sharing with a lot of girls, like, you can have that one friend that you go home with. A guy, like, I have not met a single one I could hang out with and like completely open up to. And I've tried to open up to guys, and they'll, it's a little funny or just a little uncomfortable for them, and they can't really take it. So most of my friends at school are girls, just because I can tell them almost anything. I cannot do that with a single guy I know, except maybe my brother.
Which is so fascinating, because you can sit in a group of boys and they'll start opening up to you within 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And so that's such an interesting paradigm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So who do you think, for boys, like, if there was an ideal person for them to talk to, or for them to have somebody to go to, like, who would that person be?
Well, it's usually the nicest when you have someone your age who's experiencing very similar things to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right now it would be like, since boys can't really do that in that way, it would be like someone older who has been able to realize this stuff, and so like mentors in that way.
Okay.
But once these groups start to happen and these mentors are kind of leading, I feel like after a while, after it's going to take generations, but boys will be able to have that friend that, and they can just, one after the other just open up to each other, not have to be in a setting where it's like, okay, now this is and be put in that state of mind. It's more like a free flowing thing where like you have a friend that you can just go do that, and it's not weird or weak or anything. So that would be the best person to talk to is a friend, because like I said, a lot of guys have tons of friends but can't talk to a single one of them.
And I think that Adriana's point is so spot on, and that's what we need to do. Is this, like, my goal, right, is just to create this social emotional revolution and just have an army of radically kind boys. And at the same time, when we get back to all teens wanting, connection, recognition, and power, yes, ideally, Adriana's, that's exactly what we need to be doing. And until then, our boys are so hungry to be seen that if they're seen, it won't matter. If they're truly seen and they know that there's no agenda, we get back to this text, that I get about 20, 25 texts a day on average. And it's amazing to get texts from my boys where I got a text a while ago from, it was in late spring, and it was from, I don't even know who it was from. I just saw the area code, but it was from a college student. And he said, Charis, I just saw myself. I'm at a frat party. I just saw myself through your eyes, and I just want to say I'm sorry. And I just feel like all that boy knows is that he has a mirror that is just built on compassion. And he got to just
himself. He was looking at
exactly, that he was looking at himself and being able to name, so far, this is the self that I'm experiencing, and then be loved for that. And then just the amount of times I get a text from a boy you would never, who says maybe 5 words a day, and I'll just get an I love you, good night, just across. So that need to be seen and heard and to connect is just so real.
Well, I think that really hits a spot too, because sometimes I'll just be on my phone, be lacking those connections, and Charis will get a text from me sometimes, and I'll just be in that moment, and I'll just I'll text her, and then I'll text my soccer coach that, and then I'll be going through this person I can't really say that to, they wouldn't really take it, and they'd be like, what? Because it's just like an I love you text out of nowhere. And I'm going through my contacts. Who can I send this to? And I'm just in that state. Like, I want to just tell someone. You're looking for that connection.
Right.
It just, like, okay, they're there. This is the person, I can talk to. And you just want to, you're just dying for it. You're so hungry for it. She says it exactly right.
Well, and I got your text the other day. It's just so awesome. It's so amazing.
Well, and I'm hoping that, as a result of this interview series, that parents will be inspired and have tools and that sort of thing to raise more boys who are more in tune with their feelings, who feel more compassionate, who are kinder. And so maybe as the next generation coming up, it'll be easier for you guys to connect and have those meaningful conversations.
I think so, because until right now, I think our culture is ignoring the real selves that our boys are trying to discover. And so I think at best we're ignoring it, and at worst we're teaching it out of them, teaching their real selves right out of them. And by the time they graduate from high school, it's almost too late. We need to do things now. And I encourage parents, like I fly all over the country doing groups, and it isn't rocket science, but it's nice to see it in action first. So if their parents, I'm in New York in November, and it's just a great group of parents in a few different towns that just wanted to see what this curriculum or how these conversations, what they might look like. And then I can scroll through my texts, and the great thing about being a dinosaur in this curriculum, is I've been doing this so long, I can usually text and find a graduate somewhere all over the country and they're so great. I have like 4 NYU students who are going to meet me in this like small town in New York. They're like, bring it, we're there. And all I have to do is talk for like 20 minutes and sit down and then let them really say, this, what it looks like. And I just feel like, I think the more silence is going to kill us. It's the more we talk. And what really is surprising me about the curriculum that I teach, and I keep saying the curriculum because it's called something. When I started doing this, it didn't have a name, which is sad in and of itself. I was just like, why do we not have classroom space where our students get to reflect, revise, and redraft the choices they're making? Why am I, as an English teacher, having them revise their essay 6 times for an A? But there's no place for them to actually reflect and revise the people that they're becoming and the impact they're having on the world around them. And so for a while it was called like health class, which was, like a condom and a just say no sticker, which was like so helpful. But, and then it was like character education, and then it was, it's social justice, and then now it's human development, and then it was ethics. So it's just being human. Like, how can we just teach and reward our teens and create spaces for them? Like I say, create spaces for our boys to be and practice being the men that we want them to become, rather than treat them like the men we're afraid they're going to be. Mm-hmm. And so create those spaces and just get the hell out of the way and hold the space for them like this.
Yes. So how could a parent, create space like that? So to help their child right now.
Right now, how old is their son?
Let's say preteen or teen.
Okay, is that is you say that there are going to be so many spaces you step in that are going to be super confusing, and our job is to just name at least one of those a day, and then just watch. They're it's like a baby bird, if you just talk a little bit and then you don't talk more, you just create the space and just love the hell out of them for naming whatever it was that they're naming. This was really hard, and then not solve it. Be like, wow, that sounds really hard. That would be hard for me. Mm-hmm. Right? And when our boys express confusion about a choice that they're making, to not be like, well, this is why, like, I don't know about you, but when I'm facing a new situation, I'm confused and don't know what the right answer is. So for our sons to say, I'm just really confused and not sure about this one thing, say, wow, I would be confused and unsure too. What do you think? Like, just, and have that become the norm. And it's more just, so if our boys can practice, so at least I think that my son has the tools, he gets to choose when to use them, as Adrienne was saying. Like, I need a safe mask right now. I'm with a bunch of boys that this is not the time to be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. But to know that he comes from a family where vulnerability is a kick-ass strength and will serve him and those around him in ways that he can't even begin to imagine. All he needs to know in that moment, while he's staying silent, while somebody's doing some homophobic, misogynistic joke, is to hold his ground and know that he can come home and be loved for the fact that he saw it, named it, and survived it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Cool.
I feel like only old parents would know this, but I feel like a really funny version of Sonny and Cher right now. Or like, do you know?
No, but I can imagine what it would be.
It's like a stand-up. She sings really well.
Yeah, I think most people know Cher still.
Yeah.
Cool. So, how about like for boys that are like in a situation, like you gave a good example where you were talking about like the guy had, naked pictures on his phone, and one of the guys walked up and says, if you don't delete that, I'm going to take your phone away, kind of thing. So are there other things or techniques or things that you teach that, give boys the tool to kind of intervene when they see something that's happening that's not okay?
Yeah, and I'm going to give Adriana some time to think. Maybe you can think of an example while I'm talking. Maybe not, but you don't have to. But yeah, and so my curriculum with and my facilitators, we do a lot of practice with this, and is that practice of naming where you are. So, and that's like sitting with your fallback. So you'll be in situations that all of a sudden are uncomfortable or surprising, right, to you. And teenagers already live in this back part of their brain a lot anyway, right? The amygdala. And so to force them to try to use their prefrontal cortex in those situations is stupid, because even an adult brain, when we're surprised or uncomfortable, the prefrontal cortex doesn't even work. It's covered, as a fight or flight. And so to reward our boys for just naming those situations, like in that situation, for example, with the news, let's just use that. And more and more middle school students are experiencing that. So and to not expect our children to go from being completely uncomfortable to being, I feel really threatened by your behavior and I find it morally reprehensible and I want you, it's just so unrealistic. And it just sets them up to feel ashamed and like a failure. Whereas what we do is we talk about naming where you are. So Adrienne talked about aggressive is when you invade someone else's space, or you take away their rights. Passive, you allow someone into your space or to take away your rights. Now, those aren't good or bad. We don't use good and bad in my curriculum. We use, does this serve you or not serve you? It's super simplistic and condescending to tell teens to make good choices. It's super, super not helpful. So what's serving you and not serving you? And so the idea in that moment is, when you're uncomfortable, can you simply name, and what we talk about and in this order, feel, think, act. Don't think first, because it won't serve you. It's probably a misogynistic idea if you're a boy, and for a girl, it's probably to apologize for like breathing. So basically it's feel, think, act. What am I feeling in this moment? What do I think is going on? And now, how do I act in a way that I have the least amount of regret? And so that doesn't have to mean taking that phone away from that kid, because you might regret that. It might have been too much for you that day. It was a huge social risk that you weren't ready to take. And then you just feel like crap, and maybe you did it for your parents because you didn't want to disappoint them. All of this is not heading towards autonomy and finding your true self. You're ignoring it rather than honoring it. So you just feel, think, act. And sometimes what that can be, especially with my middle school boys, is somebody says something really misogynistic or holds that phone up. You can simply just name where you are, feel, think, act. You don't have to say, I feel uncomfortable. I think what you're doing is wrong and I want you to stop. Although maybe you want to be that literal. You can also just be like, ew, that's gross. Or not my scene. Or don't like it. Or backing up and leaving the room. All of those are actions where you are responding rather than reacting to a situation that you found negative or uncomfortable. And by pausing before going right into your fallback, which is what teen boys are so taught to do, is to react super quickly. But once we start practicing that, their fallback becomes one that serves them, because they reflect, revise, redraft. And so even like Adrienne's kind of a natural, I think you came out of the womb already having some of this like knowledge, but the idea of just naming, pausing for a minute and honoring where you are. What do I feel? And then you don't have to be a hero. You also don't have to be a dick. It's also your choice. But how do you end that experience where at least you were present? And then you're hopefully rewarded by somebody you respect or love for simply doing that, of naming where you were and honoring your truth in some way, whatever that looks like.
Add on. So I feel like we're talking about our society, how it's affecting us, obviously. So a lot in these situations, these types of situations, a lot of what's going through my head is when Charis said like the parents thing, like, okay, what my parents want me to do, like I'm always thinking about what other people would want me to do. When what's most important is, like she said, okay, this is how I'm feeling. But my brother told me this one, and it's one of my favorites. It's just like, what would the person you want to be? What would they do in this situation? So once you don't have to react so quickly. It's just once you've thought a little bit, and then okay, you don't have to be the hero, because the person you want to be kind of implies like the hero thing. But you're building who you are. So if it's going to protect you and to not take that social risk, and you're not sure, then you kind of hold back and just protect yourself. And if you're not ready to act in such a bold way.
I love it. If anybody remembers anything from this interview, if Adrian just said it so beautifully of just you're building who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so for our boys, we need to create the scaffolding and then hold the space and then just honor them for the fact that they're building, not that they are starting out like an amazingly finished, structured piece.
Yeah, we're all a work in progress.
Yeah. And I love that you quote your older brother, whom I know pretty well, because Adrian's older brother, Adrian is his hero. So it's kind of a fun thing.
Uh-huh.
And he's several years older than Adrian.
Nice.
Never heard that one.
Now I'm in trouble. I'm going to get a text in like an hour.
Like, we're supposed to divulge that information.
I know he wouldn't mind.
That's great. So do you guys have any final thoughts or words of wisdom for our parents?
Love, love, love. And say it.
Yep.
Say it. Well, the biggest thing I hear from my boys that are like moving through high school is they remember the day their parents stopped coming into the room to say goodnight or I love you. And so, yeah. Love, love, love.
And remember that your kids love you, even if they're confused and come home after a day of those influences.
That's a great point.
That even if they don't say it back, or they love you too.
Awesome.
No one should say anything after that. He said it all.
There you go. Perfect. If people were interested in like bringing you to them or learning more about your curriculum, do you have things available, resources for them?
I do. If you Google me, you can do that, and then will my information be available?
Yeah, I'm going to put your information on the website too, so I'll put a link to your website.
Yeah, and just know that I have 2 teenagers myself, so as soon as this interview is over, I'm going to be busy not doing all the things that I just told all of you to do. Because it's a lot. I know it's not complicated, but it is very hard.
Hard, yes. It's a work in progress,
It's a work in progress. I'm building myself as a mother.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much I really appreciate you both being here today. And how about you, Adrian? Did you have any final words that you wanted to leave us with? No?
I don't think I have any more.
Okay, perfect.
If anyone wants to contribute to Adrian's college fund in a few years, that would be great.
Awesome. Set up a campaign, a GoFundMe campaign. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you both.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Wow. Talk about powerful. That was definitely a powerful conversation. And I think one of the things that really struck me with this conversation, especially from Adrian, really just kind of made me feel like at points where parents have no hope, like they're just not going to talk to us at all. But really, I think what the message is here is as long as we're being judgmental and making kids feel like they're disappointing us or not living up to the image that we have in our minds in some way or another, that they are going to withdraw and they're not going to share. And so it's really up to us, to rise to the challenge and make things better. So yeah, that was amazing conversation. I am just supercharged after that. So coming up tomorrow, we are going to be having 2 really important, powerful conversations. First with Savannah Sanders about trauma, sexual abuse, and sex trafficking. These are really important conversations. I hope that you will join us, especially if there's any kind of history of abuse in your family. But even if there's not, because abuse is so common, that even if your family doesn't have a history of abuse, there's a high likelihood that you know people who have experienced abuse, and or that your children will, come into contact with or possibly date in the future or have relationships with people who've been abused as well. And so There's a lot of great tools and information that can be really helpful for you navigating that kind of situation. And also, coming up tomorrow, Ellen Light will be joining us to talk about teen suicide rate and drug and alcohol use. So, two very important conversations. Definitely do not miss them, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye bye.